My name is Chris Barano. I am with yourpurposeisyourpower.com. Tonight, I'm in Miami with Sam Lee, founder of IndeCollective. He and his team of Jan Almasy, Amanda Norris, and many others have helped hundreds of professionals transform their expertise into thriving businesses. I came to interview Sam because I want to understand what it is that drives him to help other people succeed. Great to see you tonight, Sam. How you doing?
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate your time and your willingness to share. To get started, tell us what it is that IndeCollective does.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, as you know, and as we've certainly discussed before, IndeCollective was born out of my own lived experience. I'm a professional who has a commercial and general management background, have been working for decades with big and small companies alike, and doing 10 plus years of consulting myself. And what I've learned in my own experience and seen all too often in our graduates and out in the world of consulting is that experienced professionals know their craft, but of course they don't know how to build a business around their craft. And what experienced professionals need are really three key ingredients, accelerants, that when combined with their craft, allow them to build a better business. Read a coaching or a consulting practice that allows them to do three things: drive more impact, more income, and more flexibility in their lives. And those three key ingredients are: one, tried and true playbooks that help you to build a business around your craft. Second, far ahead mentorship, people who can coach you, who can teach you those playbooks and ensure that you are applying them methodically to build your own business. And then, of course, a tried and true community. Because what the heck are we doing in independence if we are in isolation, which is where too many people find themselves. So those three key ingredients are what IndeCollective provides. We provide far ahead mentorship, tried and true playbooks, and a supportive community to help people to translate their expertise, the craft they've developed over years or decades, into a coaching or consulting business that drives the impact, income, and flexibility they desire in their lives.
One thing I find interesting about your approach is you have this framework around the 3 L's. And that speaks to me personally. The reason that I joined IndeCollective is because of those elements about really respecting my life and my time here, time on earth, as well as my relationships and my income and all that. Where did that come from, the 3 L's?
Absolutely. So for more than a decade now, I've been doing an annual retreat that I attend in December. And at that retreat, it's been an opportunity to frankly take a little bit of a step back from professional and personal life and revisit both my mission statement, my values, and make sure I'm charting the right course. And that retreat has, for me, for again, many years, allowed me to look at my life in 3 dimensions. And we call those in IndeCollective the 3 L's. That's your living, the impact and income you want to be generating through your professional work. For many of our members, it's coaches and consulting. But also your lifestyle and loving, right? The other 2 L's, how you want to show up in the world, how you want to prioritize the people and the passion projects, the things that frankly draw people, in many cases, to an independent path. So those are 3 things I've always looked at, and those are 3 things that when we embark on a 10-week IndeCollective experience, we create a structured experience around for our members so that they are reflecting, they are frankly putting pen on paper on what the bigger vision elements are, and then also charting their course, getting very specific about the actionable items and those SMART goals.
Personally, I find coming from that kind of foundational framework of your life before work, like what does that look like? So for so many of us, work takes over our life, and that's our identity. And as I have moved down my path, the more it's dawned on me that there's more to life than work, and that is actually not my identity. And that's been very helpful, having that framework for me to work off of. Can you share with us a little bit about your early life, where you're from? Like, did you have inspiration around you, as maybe in school, your family, mentors? As when you were younger?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. son of a career public servant. So my mom, has kind of worked in the military intelligence field her whole career. So, probably one of the highest powered women in that field, especially decades ago when she was, an early, appointee in the Clinton administration and eventually the Secretary of the Air Force under Obama. So she's somebody who I've always admired, who, has a very strong compass from a mission and values perspective, has really been geared towards service. And the call to serve in that way was actually not her original purpose. She wanted to be in foreign affairs and work as a public servant in that arena and didn't get the job, right? That's her story. She didn't get the job right out of grad school and got the internship, the Department of the Army, and then worked on Capitol Hill and worked in multiple administrations and has worked in the private and nonprofit sectors as well. But, I think growing up with her as a primary role model, the call to serve in different ways. And she's now somebody who, at later stages of her career, has authored a book, does a lot of coaching and consulting, is on public company boards. She kind of, from the earliest days of moving in and out of different fields with an expertise, and now as her career has progressed, having a portfolio of her own, is somebody who from a young age inspired me to, one, have a call to serve in some way, shape, or form, and also to view my skill set as extensible, right? It doesn't have to be reserved for an industry, an age or stage of company, a certain sector, or a modality of work, working full-time versus working as a consultant or coach. So really, even as early as my 20s, which is fairly uncommon, becoming more common, I started to experiment with new industries, experiment with different stages of company growth, start doing consulting on the side, launch my own businesses, things that, if it hadn't been for my mom, who of course came from more of a public sector background most of her career, had it not been for her kind of opening that possibility set to me, I probably wouldn't have experimented with in the first place.
Wow, that's a beautiful thing. My mother has inspired me to, different story, but similar kind of vibe. My mother too is very much other oriented, and like, how can I serve and help and all that. And she was a career executive at Procter and Gamble.
Oh,
she
wow.
started late in her life, and she retired there. When she retired, she had a team. She was running a division of 4,000.
Wow.
4,000 people at P&G. She was on planes. She'd get up at 3 a.m. to go to Hartsfield in Atlanta and West Coast, and then back and somewhere else, Cincinnati, where they're headquartered, and in just a few short days. And for me, personally, I said, you know what? She's big respect for her, and for me as well. My mother has been an inspiration and role model. Was there ever a time, growing up with that kind of influence, maybe when you were younger or maybe even later, where you felt like maybe you don't think the way that people around you do? Were you ever would you ever call yourself a nonconformist? Like in high school or college?
For sure. Every single person, myself, yourself, everyone has unlimited potential. And I say that with a lot of conviction. I really think we have so much more potential than we know, so many of us. And, I believe that of myself, I believe that of you, I believe that of every person. But I did not always believe that of myself. And when I was growing up, especially, in early childhood, really through early days of high school, I struggled and I struggled and I struggled in school. I was challenged academically and was fortunate to have a lot of help, a lot of tutoring, access to a great education, and struggled all the same. And I didn't quite fit in. I didn't have like the huge group of friends, and I didn't, play sports very well, and things did not click. And I remember from the earliest days of the earliest report cards, before grades existed in the lower grades, it was Sam needs help and improvement. Like, that was the designation that I distinctly remember. So it was a deep feeling of inadequacy in those early days in multiple departments. And it wasn't until really middle school going into high school that things started to click. And, at that stage of career, or stage of life in school, it was really work ethic that kicked in. And I decided, you know what? I see my mom, who's achieved in such profound ways. I've, seen colleagues and others do the same. And I'm just going to figure out how to work within these constraints and give it an A effort. And it was through efforting and through tireless efforting that I eventually was able to succeed in a school environment and do things of that nature. It wasn't until I was in the professional world, out of school, and this was, exiting Potomac, graduating from UPenn, and then graduating from Harvard, where I still struggled. School was never easy for me because memorization, never easy for me. Just the rote stuff never clicked for me. But when I finally got into the professional world and I was working at Goldman Sachs, what I immediately realized, even within that first year, is that while the traditional schooling was so challenging, being out in the world and being, somebody who can reason through very complex situations, being somebody who could, frankly, see a group of people and find the through line and motivate and mobilize people to do really great things, even if I was the youngest person in the room. Qualities that were not tested on, qualities that were not taught, qualities that ultimately made me very successful at Goldman and the youngest person in their executive office who was working with, executives in that space. Those qualities are what, carried me very powerfully in the earliest days of work and continue to kind of carry me through 6 industries, companies of various stages, founding my own things. And I realized that because I didn't believe in myself in the early days, and because, frankly, I was receiving feedback that I was less than or inadequate, I didn't believe in my potential. So it was the beginning of believing in my own potential. And then by and by, as career progressed, and the next hurdle approached, and we were talking about this the other day, but, when I was in my late 20s and going from, being not an individual contributor or a manager, but being elevated to my first public company, P&L ownership, hundreds of employees under my remit responsibility. That was the next moment of, reckoning, where I realized, gosh, I'm going to either have to deal with the psychology that could potentially limit me here once again, and the imposter syndrome that you hear about so much, that so many of us face at different points, if not on a reoccurring basis in career and life. If I wasn't going to deal with that head on, that was going to be the thing that kind of curtailed what could have been a very successful or an unsuccessful moment in career. So psychology and knowing that I had more potential than I thought was so powerful for me. And it's something that I believe in for everybody and that I try to harness and unlock in other people.
That really rings with me. I've had a different path, but I have come upon hurdles and challenges that I couldn't overcome because I had some programming or beliefs or something inside of me that caused me to doubt myself. And maybe I reacted by choosing this path or that path or, different reactions to it. And just in the past 5 or 6 years, I decided, it was creeping up on me that I needed to get inside and understand what was going on underneath the hood. Mm-hmm. And I did some work, some pretty heavy personal work, 6 months intensively with a one-on-one, and then also in a group setting where I was able to get inside my subconscious and kind of relive my childhood in a sense. My parents are both beautiful. They're both great people, right. But some things seeped in
Yep.
and got in here
Yep.
and then drove this. And then I'm finding myself like, man, I need to like fix something. Something's not quite right.
Yeah.
And I started doing some research online. And, I've always been a believer and, a practitioner of self-improvement. You mentioned Tony Robbins last night.
Yep.
And I remember buying Tony Robbins CDs off the TV
Yep.
in the 1990s.
Sure.
I
Yep.
remember paying $200 for like a box set. It was like Unleash the Power Within or something. And it was this, and it was a lot of money to me at the time.
Yeah.
And, I had them playing in my car, and I've always been a seeker to understand myself, my role, and, what you say resonates with me. I think a lot of people, could help accelerate their own personal experience here, and not just business wise, but personally too, by understanding that sometimes things seep into the subconscious and you get programmed at a young age, and maybe you have a false belief about yourself. That's what I went through to correct those beliefs. They weren't at all true. It was just some emotional thing that I was hanging on to.
Totally.
But that's cool. Harvard. I didn't know you lived in Boston, so you lived in Cambridge, I guess.
I lived in Cambridge. Yeah.
Did you go to grad school after that?
So Harvard was grad school. I was at the
cool.
Kennedy School and studied public policy of all things. So I've kind of like, and that kind of pursuit was out of an interest of what frankly my mom had done, right? So I thought in early chapters of my career I was going to follow a very similar path as hers, not necessarily in the defense industry as much as international affairs, and I ended up taking a different path, but loved that education and met so many wonderful people, and still am very passionate about public policy.
So you have a master's in
public policy.
Public policy.
Yeah.
So from there, did you go to Goldman?
I did. Yep, right after that.
What's in like 3 sentences or so? What would be the takeaway from an experience at Goldman? Like I read these these stories, these kind of scandals. They make their people work 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it's very intense. I imagine competitive.
Yeah.
Internally, did you thrive in that? Are those stories true?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah. So as a young person, I probably never worked harder. And I also learned in those couple of years to work smarter, right? Because there was so much to do. And, it was a unique experience. So I was not your run-of-the-mill analyst or associate crunching numbers as much as a chief of staff in their executive office. So I was able, post-financial crisis when I was there, to work with some of the most senior executives, the CEO, the partnership, and as a very young person, call it my early mid-20s, work across those teams on strategy and on frankly orchestra conducting some of the big things the firm was doing at the time, both externally. That was the time when Warren Buffett was investing in the firm and kind of creating confidence around the firm, and frankly, Wall Street post-financial crisis. So got to meet Warren Buffett a number of times, which was fascinating, really warm, charismatic guy who had a real affection for the firm, and also got to work on a bunch of really interesting internal projects. So it's kind of this interesting role where, one, I was able to see some of the most senior, seasoned, smart people I've still ever met up close in action in all the good, bad, and ugly, right? Where they were their smartest and most contributing, and also probably where they were having their breakdowns because the hours were intense. There was a lot of tough things we were working through. So I was able to learn from example and learn the good and the bad from example. And it was also a moment where I was able to see kind of those traits that I mentioned earlier that were strengths that I maybe didn't appreciate from the schooling years because they weren't things that were taught or things that were tested. The ability to kind of see the big picture, connect the dots, narrate the story, mobilize and motivate other people to take big action and to get big results, things that are just not schooled around, but that when you can nail those early in career, they differentiate you from people
Right.
that are just crunching numbers or, writing memos, and ultimately can catapult you pretty quickly into more elevated roles. So
So it sounds like when you got put into this role and you realized you had powers that you didn't quite fully understand before
Yeah.
that role.
Yeah.
Do you think that you got that job because they could see something in you that you weren't quite aware of yourself?
I think for sure. And I will say I've been very fortunate in my career and also personal life to find a lot of mentorship, and also sponsorship. So I've tried to do the same mentorship and sponsorship for others who I see, and try to bring them along,
Yeah.
see what's possible in them, help them to name it, and find ways to utilize it, and then look for opportunities out there for others to put their superpowers to work in powerful ways. So yeah, Dina at the time I think saw that in me. Another boss, Francis, who pulled me from Goldman to AOL, which was like such an unlikely move, and a move that pretty much every family member, every colleague counseled me against. They were like, why are you going from the finance industry and the firm that's at the top of the leaderboards to an antiquated internet company
America
that
Online.
I didn't even realize existed anymore, is what people were telling me. And I said, listen, I've met this guy Francis, and in our first conversation, I knew that this was the next right move. And the reason for that is, one, he was an incredibly impressive young guy who had, risen from the ranks. He was from Bangalore and had started in their back office in Bangalore, and was, at the time I was meeting, recently elevated to president of like all the AOL brands. And he was in his late 30s. So he had really risen in the ranks and against every odd. So I thought that was very impressive, and that was a meeting I wanted to take. But what really kind of compelled me, and in the conversation made me know immediately that this was the next right move for me, is that the first question he asked me was, Sam, what do you really want to do? Like, what are you here to do next?
Yeah.
And I knew exactly what the answer was. And it's not the same answer for me today,
Yeah.
but I knew exactly what the answer was for me in that moment. I said, Francis, I'm a strategist, I'm a communicator, I'm a chief of staff right now, but I'd love to be the general manager of a business, and I'd love to really sponsor an amazing team and build great products for customers. And I can't do that at Goldman Sachs, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to be my
Right.
path there. So if you can teach me how to do that, here are the things that I know I can do for you, as a newly minted president who's dealing with a very complicated board and a host of other things. And he said, I get it, and we'll do it. Give me 2 to 3 years and you'll get there. And 2 to 3 years later, I was running a $100 million business with 300 people at a public company.
Wow.
From having been an individual contributor effectively at Goldman Sachs. I was, orchestra conducting others, but I was basically an IC. So he made that happen, and I knew in that conversation, when he took the interest and he expressed the willingness to sponsor me, and I could see that he had done it for himself, that those were the data points that I needed to know that this was the right next step.
But is there some satisfaction that you get internally? Is it an emotional feeling like, yes, I've changed the world with this product, or
Yeah.
I've helped people grow themselves with the team?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is that?
At that particular stage of career, I was doing a lot of reading around the power of, like, frankly, business and even managers in business, of like affecting people's lives just at the unit level, at the individual level, right? If you're a great manager, you're not just helping somebody to unlock their growth potential and their ability to contribute on the job. If you're doing a really great job and you are helping them to see their potential, they're returning to their home and returning to their life and coming back to their community as a much more full version of themselves, right? So I was doing a lot of reading about that. And this was at a stage of career where I had said, listen, public policy is not for me right now. Because I had worked briefly. I worked at World Bank at the very early stages of my career, big multilateral organization. as a teeny tiny peon, and I was immediately over that because I could see the layers of bureaucracy, the layers, just like getting a memo to my boss, who was a fairly junior. I'm like, this is not the speed at which, this is not the impact at which I want to be pursuing a career.
Right.
This is not for me. So I know there's a better way for me to be having an impact out there. And that's where I was reading all sorts of books about the power of business to do good, right?
Yeah.
Out in the world through products, the people you touch, and the philanthropy that you do, but also internally as a manager or as a team member. So that was kind of a lot of the inspiration in that moment. How do I become a general manager? Somebody who's running the whole business unit and has a real purview over people and hopefully can create environments in which people can do the best work of their careers. Like that was for many, many years inside of companies, my mantra, right? That's what people knew me by when I was at WeWork. I was the guy that was building hundreds of persons team all over the world and not just growing WeWork, but growing a culture where people felt individually and collectively we had what we needed to do the best work of our careers.
So you got to AOL and you had the sponsorship
Yep.
from this wonderful businessman. And what kind of results were you able to achieve there? Were you able to fulfill your vision?
Yeah, absolutely. So my vision, first and foremost at AOL, and it's been this vision at any company or consulting engagement I've ever dropped into, was to show up and hopefully contribute so meaningfully that I would be almost immediately instilling, let me start that over.
Sure.
So, when I got to AOL, my top priority, having just, met this gentleman, Francis Lobo, my boss, was to make sure that he was getting as much out of me as possible to be his most successful self. He'd just been elevated into the president of this division, AOL, the AOL brands. And in that first year, he was, for the first time, working with a board of directors. He was, for the first time, stitching together an executive leadership team. He was, for the first time, needing to go from being, a VP or SVP level manager of managers to really leading from the front and communicating with a lot of authority. And those were all things that, working with executives and working with board members at Goldman Sachs, I had a great deal of confidence in and could instill, I think, in him a great deal of confidence and sounding board and make sure that he was making his smartest decisions to be his most successful self. So that was my first priority, was making sure that I could do those things for him because that's what he saw in me. And as I said, in our very first conversation, he said, what is it that you're really here for? What are you trying to do? And I didn't have to ask for him to provide the counsel, the mentorship, or the opportunities for me to be learning how to fill out and complement my own toolkit.
At WeWork, you helped scale from 50 to 600 locations. I assume a lot of those locations were international and had their own challenges, maybe language barriers, cultural barriers. Mm-hmm. I think, just imagining going and working, say, in Japan would require certain acknowledgement of customs and the way business is done there. What did that experience teach you about human nature and organizational growth?
I learned so much, so much from the WeWork experience. When I joined WeWork, it was a middle stage company in growth terms. So we had a couple hundred employees, a dozen or so locations in the US and another dozen or so locations internationally. We just started going international. And as you mentioned, in the time I was there, the 4 years I was there, we scaled from about 200 million in revenue to 4.5 billion. And I was not the first employee in the growth organization, but was ultimately the SVP and head of it. And we took the team from really a ragtag small group of people to 300 plus people that I hired and more than 1,000 people globally.
Wow.
And that was, at that point, peak moment, 2019, when that IPO was meant to happen. And the company was on paper worth $49 billion. at that point we had 10,000 employees from that, couple of hundred people when I joined. So a totally different organization that hyper scaled over the course of 4 years on revenue, on its footprint and customer base in terms of just every dimension you can imagine. So there's a lot of learning that happens when you're growing that quickly, a lot of mistakes that you make and things that you can do better next time. That era for WeWork, that era for most startups was known as the growth at all costs era. That was fueled by a lot of ambition on the part of founders and executive teams, but also from the top, investors who were seeing dollar signs in valuations rising and had a lot of capital to deploy.
Yeah.
And we're very excited for all the right reasons to empower ambitious founders and executive teams to continue to grow. So for those who watched the documentary or the mini series or read the book, you've probably heard the tales of Adam and Rebecca. You've heard of Masa-san, our primary investor in the last couple of years from SoftBank. So there was a lot of personalities. But in that growth at all costs eras, we were doing that, right? We were investing heavily to continue to expand into new geographies, into new customer segments, and that growth ultimately was not sustainable.
Yeah.
There were companies that came before us that did IPO, that did have their quote unquote liquidity events in that era, and we were unfortunately, the company that became the downfall of that era, quite candidly. When our IPO didn't happen, a lot of companies, the door closed on IPOs in that moment, and frankly, COVID happened shortly thereafter. In terms of things that I learned about kind of human dynamics and human nature, we talked earlier tonight about 3 L's, about living, building a meaningful business and career, but also lifestyle and loving, making sure you're showing up for yourself, your community, and pursuing things outside of work, people, passion projects. That was stuff that I was doing for myself in that era. And I think for that reason, those 4 years, as much as they could have been, honestly, grueling, they could have been grueling. There was a year that I visited 20 plus countries. I was on the road 200 days of that year all over the world. That could have been grueling. It was one of the most fun years of my life. And I had so many meaningful connections that I made that year with employees who were under my responsibility, many of whom were mentees, people I was sponsoring, and also just working in my organization that I got to travel with in Seoul or in Sao Paulo and visit customers and also, engage in just understanding their culture. Right. So I really, in that era, as much as I was working a lot and traveling nonstop, I really enjoyed the people. I enjoyed the opportunity to create an environment for the people that work for us and also for the customers that were participating in the WeWork experience to really make careers that they loved and to make lives that they loved. And it was a life and a career that I loved at that point. So I think those 3 L's were thankfully very much a part of my toolkit at that point, and I didn't allow the grueling work to be that. It was a lot of fun.
Well, it sounds like you had emotional and mental balance, and you respected your time probably in your mind. You cared for yourself. The story that movie tells, the broad stroke, is that it's speed, excess, to hell with being reasonable. Growth at all costs.
Yep.
That's really a high contrast to the picture you paint of your operating in that. That tells me that you have a lot of love for yourself and respect for your time and how you conduct your life, professionally.
Yeah.
Big respect for that, Sam. Big
Thank
time.
you.
Did in that, and you don't have to answer whatever is not appropriate or whatever you don't want to answer, but I imagine a founder of that company said, I have this dream. I want to have this company that does these things, that provides workspaces. Do you think that other elements took over the original purpose? You know, we're here talking about purpose.
Yeah.
And I say that as somebody who earlier in life thought that the purpose of work was to make money. But the way I see it now, where I am at in my path, is that the purpose of work is really to help others, to support the life you want to live, etc. Can you comment on anything about the WeWork experience and what you saw? Maybe not with Adam, but just overall this kind of desire to get big and make a lot of money, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in that era of growth at all costs, you saw it on steroids. But I think all too often, when things get bigger, whether it be people, right, they're put on a pedestal, they get bigger in their own eyes or in the eyes of other people, organizations, when they get bigger and they start to get better capitalized and more resourced. When things get bigger, unfortunately, people, organizations, cultures can lose sight of their DNA. They can lose sight of what they're there to do. From a purpose perspective, they can lose sight of their superpowers, right, and where they should be serving others.
Right.
So there's no question that whether it be Adam as a leader, whether it be WeWork as an organization that continued to buttress and extend and expand, even not just geographically, but into new customer segments, into new product offerings, things that were stretching us probably beyond what was natural because we were capitalized to do it and we had bigger ambition and bigger vision to do it. When that happens and you kind of separate from your DNA and when you lose sight of the purpose, things begin to deteriorate.
In those situations, is there ever, a minder minding the ship? Like, hey guys, let's like focus on the DNA. Let's focus on our purpose.
Yep.
Is there ever a voice of reason, or is it just, does the money or the status take over?
Yeah, I think we were fortunate that there were a number of voices that were kind of guiding us back to our core. But I'll say net for WeWork, it got away from us.
Yeah.
Right, and it got away from the company, and you see it in the end result. And we had huge money flowing into the company and huge ambition from our key investor as well as from our CEO, and their powers combined, they completely controlled the board and completely controlled the direction we were moving in.
Yeah.
So there was really no standing in the way of that runaway train. And honestly, like, we did a lot of great work. We it's not that co-working was a new concept, but it was proliferated and made into something that was very commonplace all over the world. And WeWork was, played a big hand in instrumenting that. So there was a lot of good that came of it. And without that level of vision and drive and ambition, those big things don't just happen, at least not as quickly as they did. But we separated from the DNA, the purpose became a bit more distanced, and when that happens, I've seen it in other places too, things deteriorate.
From WeWork, what happened next? Was Indie forming in your mind? Was there something going on with you personally? Were you drawing on your experience at Goldman or AOL, et cetera? What was the genesis for Indie?
Yeah, so Indie was born, as we discussed, out of my own personal need. And at that point, having exited WeWork, and it was, devastating, like so much of my identity at that point professionally over those 4 years, so much of my life, like I was traveling all over the world with colleagues and just putting my full self into this. So much of it was tied up in WeWork. So that was a big reckoning for me personally and professionally when that ended. And I knew that there was no way in hell I was going back to a full-time job in the near term. And then, of course, COVID happened. So finding a big-time executive role in that environment when companies were totally off their kilter and trying to just sort out like how they were going to stay open, that was not going to happen. So both out of my own personal need to create spaciousness and to frankly make sure I was going to try before I buy. I wasn't going to go and work for any old founder at this point. I wanted to make sure I was working with a company and working with an executive team that I could be really confident, shared DNA, shared, frankly, ambition, shared an operating style. For that reason, and then also because finding like the next big executive role was not going to be easy against the backdrop of COVID, I decided that I was going to spend at least a year full-time consulting. So I'd been consulting at that point for many years, on and off, generally on the side. And when I started to full-time consult and really build momentum around it, I found that in my own experience, in about 20 hours a week, I was able to make more than what I was making in a full-time executive role. And that was without having figured it all out, but because I had a great network, because I had skills and reputation around those skills, I was able to build enough of a pipeline and know how to do my work efficiently enough that in half the typical hours, I was able to make as much, frankly, a little bit more than I was making as a full-time executive. And that inspired me. And as I was having more and more conversations with others who I was partnering with in the work or who I was networking with to find new leads, what I found among others who had a great deal of experience in their own craft is that people with expertise know their thing, but by God, they certainly don't know how to do everybody else's thing. They've been surrounded by marketers and salespeople and product leaders and people that know how to do the pricing and the other aspects of building business that they don't know how to do for themselves.
Yeah.
So what I found in my own experience and what I heard from so many others is that, gosh, I have an expertise. I have an ambition to deliver it direct to companies, so do business on my own terms, but building my own business, gosh, that seems complicated. Or if I'm going to just try to figure it out, I'm probably going to do it inefficiently. And it was out of that need to kind of frankly level up what I was doing that IndeCollective was born. And I assembled a group of people that were in my network, people who, many of whom I've known for years, who've built their own 7 or 8 figure businesses, who each have their own playbook and are able to teach what they know best, whether it be branding or pricing or go-to-market strategy or the back office of business. And the first cohort that we ran was a cohort that I ran for friends.
Tell us a little bit about the structure of the 10-week program, some of the highlights, some of the modules, and a bit about the instructors.
Yeah, for sure. So first, the goal of IndeCollective is to help experienced professionals like yourself to take their expertise, something they developed over years or even decades, and translate it into a better business. And the way that I define a better business is a coaching or a consulting practice that's going to help you to do 3 things. I want you to achieve more impact, more income, and more flexibility in your life. So you can pursue not just income or outcomes for clients, but frankly, people, passion projects, other things that light you up. So our goal is to help you to take that expertise and build your own better business. And in order to do that, we've assembled a team of experts, more than a dozen experts who have built 6, 7, and 8 figure businesses who are going to be coaching you over the course of 10 weeks. And that first week is designing for independence. It is your personal vision and goal setting week. And we do that as a cohort. So it turns into actually a fabulous networking week because you are connecting with people who share mission, who find shared purpose, and also complementary skill sets that supercharge one another. And in that week, we really help you to think about what we call your 3 L's, your living, how you'll make more impact and income through the living or the business you're building, but also lifestyle and loving, how you want to show up in the world and prioritize people, passion projects, all the other good stuff that independence helps you to pursue. So we spend a week making sure you chart your course, you set the big vision, we get clear on the goals, and we identify some points of leverage, those aspects of business building that we're going to focus you on so that you really prioritize these 10 weeks in powerful ways and get the most bang for your buck. So that's where we start. It's about vision and goal setting. And Dan Savage, who you've had a chance to work with, he's actually an alumni of IndeCollective. So 65% of our speakers have built 7-figure businesses with us, and they come back and teach. So he built Propel Coaching, which is a wildly successful coaching practice. He's now translating his coaching practice into a scalable, ChatGPT driven, like on-demand coaching tool. So he's really productized it. This is somebody who's been through the program who teaches this week. Very inspiring guy. So that's the first week, designing for independence. The next 9 weeks are really about taking your vision and goals and translating them into your personal business value chain. So what the heck does that even mean? Your personal business value chain is all about making sure you're focused on the right things that are going to create the most value for you, your clients, and also the world, right? In order to do that, we need to start you focusing on your productization. Productization is really about helping you to focus on the right clients, the right painkiller problems that you can solve for those clients, and then translate what your expertise is into a scalable offering, something that is not trading your time for your money. Because if you're just trading time for money, you're in a hamster wheel.
Right.
It's one in, one out. So that next week is all about productization. We're gonna help you to niche down on the right clients, the ones that you wanna serve and that you are best equipped to create value for, to get into the right problem set that you can solution around so you are creating the most value for you and your clients, and then to figure out your scalable offerings. That's where we spend the next week. It's getting you focused on the right things so that you are putting your energy, your effort, and your impact, and also the money you're gonna generate into the right things. We then kind of shift into a series of weeks that translate your focus in business into the right brand so that you can attract great clients, the right pricing so that you can be charging based on value, not time, and then create your Venus flytrap. How do you attract clients? How do you lead sales conversations? How do you send proposals that communicate the value you create so you can charge for that value as opposed to charging for time? So that's the next series of steps. How do you brand yourself? How do you price yourself? How do you build a sustainable business pipeline? And those all stem from vision and goals, clarity of client and offering, and continue you down this business value chain.
In my experience in the pricing module was mind-blowing because of the experience that I've had either working for a day rate or charging some hourly fee.
Yeah.
And then other people in the cohort coming from salaried positions and learning about value-based pricing, mind-blowing. And I could see it also in the people in my advisory group too, just, really revolutionary. And I know that that's probably, common sense from, people coming from serious industry background like yourself or some of the other teachers, but like that's nothing that I had ever come across. And I've tried to educate myself over the years, and a lot of little tidbits like that, honestly revolutionary for me.
Yeah. And that week, speaking of just great instructors and members of the community, Josh Neckes, who you know, teaches 2 weeks. He teaches us productization. He teaches us value-based pricing. And he likes to say that productization and pricing are just two sides of the same coin. Productization is you as a consultant or coach coming to your ideal client, somebody that you're passionate to serve, and saying, hi client, I've worked with people like you for years, and I've solved problems like this big hairy one that you have in front of you for years. And we're gonna work together, solve this problem, and create a giant bag of value on the other end of it for you and for your organization. And that's the product that we're gonna deliver. That's your productization. And in exchange for that, I'm just gonna ask for a smaller but commensurate bag of value for me and my business. And that's my value-based pricing. This is a fair value exchange, and you're reasonable. I know you wanna solve this problem, and you'll be happy to pay me that smaller but commensurate bag of value. And when you're able to very clearly hone in on that right client, you're able to hone in on problems that really matter, and when solved, create huge bags of value for them, they will always, when you can articulate it in terms they understand, be willing to pay for it. And when you think about your business as a fair value exchange, it's not extractive, it's creating value and sharing in value. It feels good. And by the way, our members on the other side of 10 weeks, the big data says 500 plus graduates strong will charge 50% more than they did when they started.
Right.
Some much more. And it's
Right.
because they're getting clear on the client, getting clear on their problems, and able to express the value and run a sales process around it. And this is stuff that I've had salespeople go through the program. They can't do it for themselves. You really need the coaching.
You know, it's interesting. There's some people in my advisory group, my A team, that have a lot of knowledge in their own industry and their own niche and what they do. They're very, professional and experienced, but some of these concepts they had never heard of either.
Right.
I think we have to be careful, all of us as independents, to not assume that we know everything when it comes to this kind of stuff about running our business. We can be really smart in one area, but just not be informed in another. And so that's why I think, for me, this has filled in a lot of gaps. There's a lot of little things that have just been really, really helpful to me.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, think about some of the best organizations you've worked for. I know the best ones that I've worked for. I was fortunate to have both mentors and peers who could flank me and frankly lead me in departments that were not my expertise. And that's what IndeCollective is here to do, right? We provide the mentorship from coaches who have built 7 and 8 figure businesses. And you're also surrounded by a cohort of peers, people who are maybe at a similar or even a slightly later stage than you in building their business, but who have complementary skill sets. And when you are in that level of sounding board, advice, and accountability with a group of people who are further ahead and flanking you with compliment, it's incredibly powerful in filling in your gaps.
absolutely. I'll tell you that one person in my A team has been really helpful in our talks and our meetings on Mondays. And in fact, he's responsible partly for me doing what I'm doing with you tonight.
Wow.
He, through me explaining my experience and how I've helped people in the past and what I want to do moving forward, he kind of improvised one night and said, "Hey, well, Chris, it sounds like you should think about it. You should think about what you're doing from this angle because you really like doing this. You're really good at that."
Yeah.
And it helped orient me, in ways that the instructor couldn't, or even reading some of the material. So for me, the A team has been fantastic. So big part of I think success for a lot of people. I'm imagining. Can you tell us some of the success stories from previous students?
Absolutely. And I'll say, like, the A team concept was born out of my own experience in working with a group of 6 people who came from complementary skill sets, who, as I was doing my own work on my business, really took the time to understand my vision and goals, and each week show up for about an hour, create space for me to ask a tough question and vice versa, them to ask a tough question, and then provide active listening and sounding board. The beauty of an A team alongside a curriculum and coaching model like IndeCollective is that everybody in that group of 6 or 7 has got context. What do I mean by context? These are people that are getting to know you and your business, so they're deeply understanding you, but also have understanding of our frameworks, productization, pricing, branding, so they can give you reliable feedback and help you to iterate on your thinking and get to your most confident right next step. And what I do find of so many people out there who are winging it when it comes to this important stage of their career and building their own business is that they are seeking advice from people who don't have context. They are not up to speed with where they are trying to build a business. And more importantly, these are smart people they're seeking advice from who don't know answers about critical questions related to building a business. If you ask somebody about value-based pricing and they don't know what the framework is, they are likely to give you the wrong answer, which might sound confident and might lead you down the entirely wrong path. So the context is king in this instance, and the A team has got context on you and context on the frameworks that will get you moving in the right direction. In terms of just, success stories, 65% of our speakers are people who have graduated from this program and built their own 7 or 8 figure business, and they come back and teach. So we kind of eat our own dog food, and it's a community that's built by community, a community that's frequently taught by members of the community. And 70% of people in the community do business together, trade referrals, collaborate on projects, use each other's services because it's a trust network, right? We are really tight knit in that regard. We've had people graduate from more than 20 disciplinary backgrounds over the last 5+ years, 500 plus graduates strong. A couple of people that really inspire me are people like Kyle Westaway. He happens to be a speaker now. He leads a workshop series on how do you grow your business while saving 8 hours a week. He helps people put in place process, systems, and tools that have allowed him to grow his small law practice. He was a one-man band when I met him 5 years ago. Westaway.com is the name of his company. He's grown it from about $500K a year to now nearly $2 million a year. And he's put in place processes, systems, and tools that have allowed him to do a couple things. One, greatly grow his impact and income. But just as important, as he will tell you, he now has 2 young kids, a beautiful wife, and he works 8 hours less a week. And that's the lesson he teaches our members. He works less than he used to. That's time he spends with his family, and he now has 2 really cool newsletters. The weekend edition is the one you may have heard of, that have 200 plus subscribers each, 200K plus subscribers each. And he pens those himself, right? Like, this is a busy business builder who has found the time because he's built a better business to do that. So Kyle is an instructor. He's a graduate, and he's somebody that, really, I think, lives what we teach and teaches what we teach.
200,000 subscribers.
Subscribers to his newsletter. Wow. Yeah, really impressive. And he started another one, which is focused on startups, which I think is now, in the vicinity of 100,000. So he's a real wordsmith in addition to being a very smart lawyer and now business builder.
What I've seen in my own personal experience advising my clients is there's a bunch of, entrepreneurs, small business owners, practitioners, coaches, et cetera, that don't realize once you start going down this path, ideas like newsletters, ideas like building a video course on demand, these kind of monetization models, a lot of people aren't aware of, that's fantastic. Well, congratulations, to Kyle. Amazing. What would you say to somebody who has been in a career, let's say they're mid-career, and they have an inkling that they want to do their own thing, but they're afraid? What would you say to them if they're considering going off on their own?
First, know that life is a tapestry of experiences. I was probably fortunate in having a mentor in my mom who had a tapestry early on that kind of taught me that early in my career, I could make my career tapestry. But many of us have kind of stayed in an industry, stayed perhaps with a company for an extended period, and psychologically, we then feel limited when change is necessitated because of economic or job loss, or when we feel compelled because we realize we're tapped out from a mission or a purpose perspective and we need to kind of chart a new course. So the first thing I think people should look out in the world and appreciate is that life and career can, and for many of us will be, a tapestry of experiences. And when you think about consulting and coaching, it is an incredible, powerful set of tools that allow you to really build your own tapestry of experiences and build your own portfolio, right? You've probably heard people say, the future of work is a portfolio of work. And I believe that, right? Consulting, coaching, investing, advising, doing multiple things under your own moniker. Like, that is a powerful thing that you can pursue. And it doesn't have to be when you're retiring, right? It can be, once you have the right level of expertise, it can be at a much earlier age. And I started really doing it in earnest in my 30s. I see many people doing it in their 30s and 40s, and many of our members are 30s, 40s, 50s, and public company, board members.
Yeah. I've always worked independently, but, I'm in my 50s and I've always been comfortable with it. It's never been a problem, but I think there's probably a lot of people out there that are talented and you see the pressures of AI and downsizing. I talked to a woman today that has been laid off and she had a long successful career in the tech industry. She worked at Red Hat and she's afraid. You've worked at Goldman Sachs, AOL, and WeWork. What have you been able to draw from those experiences that gives IndeCollective kind of a secret sauce?
I'd say what I've learned from those professional experiences that has helped me, and it has certainly informed, the drive behind IndeCollective, is that as professionals, particularly mid and late stage professionals, we need to focus on our superpowers. And I'll define a superpower as something that you are uniquely good at doing, but that also gives you energy. Because smart people can do a lot of things well, but they might be drained at the end of a long day. So first and foremost, you need to focus on your superpowers. And at IndeCollective, we help people to zero in on those superpowers because as mid and late stage career professionals, we've done a lot of things. So we help you to focus on the right superpowers that deliver the most impact for your client and most income for you. And then you need to complement your superpowers with the right business building toolkit. You need to surround yourself with the right mentors, the right playbooks, and the right supportive community to build a business around those superpowers so that you can be efficiently and effectively delivering your consulting and coaching to get the most bang for your buck.
Simon Sinek once said, "People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do what you do." Sam Lee, why do you do what you do?
Well, since an early age, I have really been motivated by this belief that all of us have an incredible amount of potential, maybe even unlimited potential, but typically because of how we were raised or the environments in which we've grown up, personally, professionally, we've capped that potential, or others have capped it for us. And knowing that in myself, knowing that in you, knowing that everybody has this potential has motivated me in every walk of life and in every aspect of career. It's motivated me in the context of organizations to focus on building teams, cultures, environments where individually and collectively people can do the best work of their careers. And when I started doing a lot of consulting myself and wanted to do it collaboratively, it drew me to build IndeCollective because I knew that when people surround themselves with mentors and peers that complement their skill sets, they can build better businesses. So human potential has really been that draw for me, and making sure that I'm helping to create environments for full-time workers and companies, and then for folks that want to build their own businesses to do that at that next level.
What would you say to somebody who's watching this, who feels trapped either in their own independent business or maybe even a career that they have a dream of leaving and starting their own independent practice? What would you say to them if they're scared but they have a desire to do their own thing? What's the biggest piece of advice that you would give them?
Well, if you are in that seat and if you are scared, you're not alone. But know that if you are ready to grin, bear it, and take the leap, you are also so far from being alone. Just since COVID, now 4 or 5 years ago, we've seen a surge in people pursue an independent path, right? Built coaching, consulting, and other small businesses. More than a third of the US workforce, that's more than 60 million US adults are now building their own businesses. That's up more than 10% just in these last few years. And the fun fact is that within the first 6 to 9 months of going independent, the average person who goes independent is making what they did in that full-time job. That's an average person who is not well-resourced, who doesn't have all the mentorship, who doesn't have all the right toolkits, who doesn't have the built-in network. And I'll tell you, when I look at IndeCollective graduates more than 500 strong, many of our members double their income in a year. Many of our members in that same time are not working 5-day weeks, they're working 4-day weeks. Many of our members find that this is some of the most joyous period of their lives because they're not just pursuing work for the sake of earning income, but they're doing meaningful work for clients they care about and freeing themselves up for people and passion projects that matter, right? So the average person can make this work. In fact, they can make as much as they did in their full-time job and probably do it on terms that make more sense for their families. And I'll tell you, when you surround yourself with the right mentors, the tried and true playbooks, and a supportive, smart-minded community, it can be exponential. It has been for me. It has been for 500 plus of our grads.
Beautiful. Sam, thank you so much for your time,
My pleasure.
and I look forward to talking again.
Amazing. Thank you, Chris.